Hi, my name's Nina, and this video is going to be about my testimony. Before I get started, I just want to let y'all know that my testimony is going to be read on paper. Reason being is because my testimony is like super long. I've already tried doing it on video. It didn't work. I would remember things that I should have said earlier on in the video, and of course, the videos, they were too long. So it just wasn't worth it. The other thing is that everything that I'm going to be talking about here in this testimony is not my entire testimony. There are going to be certain things that I'm going to leave out on purpose just because I feel like the details don't need to be mentioned. Certain people don't need to be mentioned. It's just unnecessary. I think as long as y'all know the basics of the testimony, I think then you guys have somewhat of an idea. I think that's enough. So here's to my testimony. So in my childhood years, my parents were not involved in church, nor did they hang around those who knew the Lord. My childhood wasn't peaceful. It was chaotic, unstable, and sometimes hostile. It remained unstable and chaotic practically all the way through to my teenage years. By my senior year of high school, I had already been to 10 different schools. We had moved so many times, I lost count. My mother did the best that she knew how to provide for my brother and I. Sometimes we did not have water, light, and food all at the same time. Because my mother tried her very best to provide for us, she spent most of her time working. So as a result, my brother and I spent most of the time alone. At a young age, I dealt with responsibility that my other peers probably never had to deal with. I matured very quickly. By the time I was 15 years old, I had several adults telling me how young and mature I was and that I had the mind of a 30-year-old. I started drinking at 12. It's embarrassing to think that I was doing all of this, getting drunk at 12 and hanging out with people far older than I was. My mom didn't know anything because in her mind, I was just hanging out with friends. At 14, I was very overweight, depressed, and also started to smoke pot. I was a very troubled kid and I gave my mother a hard time. In the 8th grade, I was expelled from middle school and sent to an opportunity school. I stayed there for about a year and a half, so my freshman year was my sophomore year of high school. Throughout these 3 years of high school, I learned how to organize myself, I lost weight, and I became a better person. I thought that I knew who I was and where I was going, and although I had organized myself a little bit, I never stopped partying. My senior year of high school, I was heartbroken for the first time. Going to parties every single weekend and getting high was already a habit, so after I got hurt, the partying only increased. I got high the next day since it was a Friday. This time I went up a bit higher. I always drank and smoked pot, but the night after I was hurt, I couldn't handle the hurt I felt. I needed to get rid of it fast, and I needed to make it disappear. So that night became the first night I used cocaine. After that, it became part of my weekend routine. To make matters worse, the plans I had for my life didn't work out. I was so depressed, and I was more depressed than I had ever been before in my life. And at that time, my mother had been staying in Orlando, so I thought that if I went over there, I could just start over and life would get better again. But that didn't help either. I was there for about 3 months and I couldn't find a job anywhere. While I was living in Orlando, both my mother and my brother were laid off of their jobs. They too had a hard time finding work. Eventually, I would have to go back to Miami because my mom could no longer pay the rent. Before I moved back to Miami, there was a day when I was at home. And on that day, my mom had made a comment. She said maybe I should become an escort. She wasn't being serious, but I heard what she said and I took it into serious consideration. I had no job, my plans were in the past, and I seemed to be going nowhere in my life. I had such low self-esteem and I felt like such a failure that I was willing to jump at anything that would just make me forget. Anything to push it under the rug. Exactly what I would do in the past with my partying, booze, and my drug use. When I came back to Miami, I didn't have a place to live. I had a good friend of mine that invited me into her home for a bit. I didn't start escorting then because she didn't live in the best area, so I waited it out until I could move out. I was able to move in with a family member. The same or the second week that I moved in, I began to escort. My first night was scary because I encountered an angry client who wanted to hit me with a lamp. I should have probably quit there, but I didn't. And I kept going until my 4th night of work, which I made $1,000 in one call. Right there, I was hooked. I knew how to work the job, and I made a lot of money along the way. I started October 2012. That's a good time to work because many tourists come between that time until January. Drug use increased when I worked as an escort. Most of the men that call already have drugs at their place, so by the time I'd get there, they would offer it for free. When January came around, work got slow. Work started to get sour. I got threatened, disrespected, and name called far more often than when I started. And with time, it began to sink in and it began to sting. The more calls I received, the more stressful it got. They were not getting what they paid for, and I began to detest working more and more. Until one night, I had a call with a Russian guy, and he put his hands on me. The only reason he didn't do actual harm was because we were outside in public. When they left and my driver picked me up, I had hit my breaking point when I sat in the car. The work became my drug for a little while. Besides partying and drug use, I made money and I lived a fast life for a little bit, and all the failures and hurts disappeared. Until the job stopped working the way it was at first. That breaking point was where the happy mask came off. I realized I was still unhappy and depressed. I had swept it all under the rug and I felt like such a loser. My shift hadn't finished, but my manager told me I could go home. I started working a lot less, and I didn't go back to work until about a week or two after the incident. One day, while I was at home, I felt like taking the dog for a walk, so I did. And on my way back to the house, I passed by this place that seemed to be a tiny church. And I went inside to check, and there was a meeting there. Apparently, that was the office. They all invited me to attend church that Sunday, and I did. However, I went back to work that same weekend. I finished work at 6 in the morning and went to church at 10 a.m. I could have gone to another call, but I wanted to go to church. My second week of going to church was also my last week at work. That following week, before attending church, I became a Christian on April 7, 2013. One of the things I noticed was how I felt new in some way, almost as if I had never done drugs or escorted before in my life. I have never read the Bible, and I didn't even know that I had been quoting 2 Corinthians 5:17. After I became a Christian, I was in and out of work, and the same was for my living situations. At one point in 2014, I was forced to live on my own. When I was on my own, after a couple of months, I fell on hard times. I worked as part-time security and part-time janitor. I had little hours and little pay. My fridge was totally empty and I had no money to pay the rent. I remember being in my room and thinking of my old job. In disbelief, after being 2 whole years out of it, I had to return to it once more and I really didn't want to. But no one could help me and I felt I had no other choice. I worked for about a month. I went to 2 agencies and then worked independently. I placed some food in the fridge, I paid the rent and other bills, etc. Then I was left with the thought. I did this for a short time to pay my bills. I was sick and tired of going back and forth from living situations and jobs. So I planned to work as an escort independently and I started to create a website. I was planning to make professional cards and a photo shoot. For some reason, I always felt held back from going through with it completely. One day I remembered God. I had forgotten He was even there. I forgot to ask Him for help. I told God I didn't want to be an escort. I asked Him to help me and 3 days later I got a job and it was exactly what I had prayed for. During the 4 years of my walk with Jesus, most of it was never an actual walk. I didn't even know what walking with Jesus meant. Life was just life and God was God. I called on to Him when I needed Him and that was it. Life was like anyone else's life. I had little understanding of what knowing God even meant. Until June 2017 happened. In March 2017, my brother had gone back to jail and it wasn't his first time. But in June, they had transferred him over to prison for the first time. We would be without contact with him for about 3 weeks. Not even letters could be sent. I was so concerned for him because he could be sent anywhere and who knows what can happen. When those 3 weeks started, my mom came in one day to my room and told me every time she would close her eyes, she kept seeing my brother hanging himself in his cell. Her words were so disturbing that I became anxious the moment she said that. I was so grieved that I needed peace and I began to search for my Bible. My Bible always gave me peace and that is how it all began. I can't tell you exactly how or what happened, but I literally became a different person in 1 week. And after a week of this huge transformation, I asked myself why all of this happened. Instantly, God showed me a vision. I had a flashback of myself praying in June 2015. God had revealed to me that He had a husband for me, and His will for me was to get married. If I was to get married, I knew that that would be an issue that needed to be fixed, and Jesus needed to be the center of my marriage. I knew if Jesus wasn't the center, it would end up bad. So I asked Jesus not to let me meet my husband until I fell in love with Him first. That's when I realized that all of this had taken place because I was about to meet my husband. God delivered me from the spirit of unforgiveness. He told me to start ministry on YouTube. I began to spend time with God in my room every single day for a minimum of an hour. And all I did was read my Bible and just talk to Him. What I didn't realize was that I was seeking God in the secret place. And that secret place transformed my life.